Welcome to the UAC podcast. It's Joseph Johnson with you as always, and I'm joined by my good friend and author, and someone I haven't talked to on here in a long time, Dr. Bryan Mann. The last time we talked, I looked, was 8 years ago, and you were still at the University of Missouri, so I've already missed one college. So anyway, how you doing?
Man, good. That's making me sound like I change jobs more often than I change underwear. So,
no, it just means that I'm not very good at this. That's the primarily. Maybe you think I would have touched base like annually at least, but
it's all good.
2 Olympics have gone past since the last time I did this. So anyway, you and I were periodically, I bugged you with some questions, and something that the concept or the thing that you've gotten more known for is the velocity-based training, and some of the details have intrigued me in using them in different situations or applications maybe that I didn't understand, and then we did the first book. We did another edition, and from what I understand, a new one will be forthcoming at some point.
Yeah. Once I get this program set up, and I've got a little bit more time to write, I definitely have got some concepts that I think need to be more drawn out, more explanation behind them, so that everybody can really see it. I think one of the things that I haven't done the greatest job of is giving all the information possible, because there's so much that's out there, and writing is hard. It's an art, and a lot of people aren't good at it, me included. I mean, shoot, as much as I love Doc, I remember there was a couple of times whenever we were reading his book and chatting with him it was like once a month or every 2 weeks, as we were going through it. And I had Doc sitting there on the screen and reading the step-by-step things to the person to do, and they were doing it as written. And Doc's like, "No, you idiot! You're not supposed to be doing it that way." Like, "Doc, this is what you wrote. That's not what I meant."
That's exactly. I did. It's funny that you say that. I did this a couple. I tried to trick him a couple times because he would always kind of shoot down anything I said. So I repeated something back to him verbatim what he said. He goes, "No, where'd you get that from?" And I was like, "You? Where?
This date, this time."
Yeah, no, I get it.
In this context.
I had him dead to rights. And he was like, "I didn't say that." "Yes, you did." Yeah. I recorded it.
You want me to play it for you?
Yeah, exactly. So then you can imagine the difficulty then when we're trying to translate something from Russian, and then on top of it, the guy, brilliant mind. So they're harder to follow to begin with. And then on top of that, you got to remember, he's trying to impress his colleagues. He ain't worried about me and you, or me, not you, but he's not worried about somebody like me. He's worried about impressing people like you or other, high-level guys, and just totally loses the normal reader. They don't know, especially at the coach level. They don't understand any of it.
Yeah, I followed Anatoly's conversations through Jake very well, and then sometimes the books, it was a little bit of a struggle from time to time, just because I'm trying to apply what he told me to what this says, and while they are very, very similar, it's just that we have to realize that 80% of communication is through tone and body language. Mm-hmm. Only 20% is through the written word. So it's so difficult. And that's one thing that I wish people understood more. But you know what? How many people have gone out and written books? And you don't really know that until you've done it. So I'm getting sidetracked here about writing. But
no, but you're exactly right, though. It's not an easy thing to communicate. And I did the Cliff Notes cheat code way of just calling Doc. We worked on something together, and he walked me through the process of everything. And then in there, I would sprinkle in something I read and ask him, what does this mean, or how does this apply? Yeah. And for me, for my purposes, which was just to simply, use the most effective approach to improving the qualities that we wanted to improve, that was the easiest for me, because I think if I would have read something a little complicated, I would just gotten more confused, as opposed to, here's the situation, here's the method at this time of the year, and this is how long you do it for, and these are the parameters and things you look for, instead of the deep, subcellular level stuff. Like, come
Yeah.
on, I don't have any clue about that
Which
stuff.
is
So,
cooler than heck. Don't get me wrong. And I've got the greatest respect for those people, but I've never seen a cell get up and win a gold medal.
amen.
So,
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely different. So I guess maybe to start, what's changed, or what do you think? I don't, not necessarily what's changed, but what have you learned that you think is going to change? Changing your perspective and maybe changing how you'll write about this going forward.
well, some of it is the areas with the breadth of application, and some of it, and with that breadth of application, is the devices that are utilized. One of the things that we have to realize is that going back to woodworking, that my old hobby, I haven't been able to do it since Elena's really, since she was like 2. Now that I got 2 kids, I got to wait for probably another, 6 years, whenever
Right.
the littlest one hates me before I can get back into it. But, one of the things that I learned there was you've got to use the same tape measure, for everything. So if I'm measuring a spot on the wall for a board, I better use that exact same tape measure to go out, because it's, different tape measures are going to measure differently. Well, just like that, and that's a simple device. I mean, holy cow, how much more simple can you get than a tape measure? And there's variation within a tape measure. So then if I take different styles of measurement, meaning a linear position transducer, which, like the Soviets started off with basically an Abalikov device with a timer on it, right? So then they just measured distance divided by time, bam, that's an average velocity. That's how they started out doing it, which is ingenious. Whenever you get down to it, it's like, holy cow, sometimes I think I would be better off to do that today, but that's beside the point. Then you've got accelerometers, which measure acceleration and try to estimate velocity. And they suck at it at certain levels, because whenever it's light, you accelerate and then you decelerate very, very quickly. So if in any time that you're not actually accelerating, or you're near a constant velocity, it loses its efficacy. So, accelerometers are great for like 60 to 80%. And I have heard that there are, and I haven't used these devices, the newest ones, like Move Factor X, that has gone to a quadrant system of measurement. That's into the engineering stuff. And I know enough about it here's my engineering knowledge. I know enough about it to know if somebody is filling me full of BS or not. I don't know how it works. I don't know the ins and outs of all of that. Not my training. I was a coach. But I know, what they do overall. Then we've had the camera-based systems, which are okay. They're going to have issues, but fortunately, the issues that they have end up working out okay. And what I mean by that is that I always suggest having mean velocity on your typical squat, bench, deadlift, peak velocity on the Olympic weightlifting movements and other ballistics. And in my opinion, Olympic weightlifting is a ballistic. You have a brief initial force. You get to the top of that second pull, you project the bar up into the air, and you drop it and catch it. That's a ballistic by definition. Some people want to argue that with me. That's okay. It's everybody's got opinions. They all stink. So does mine. That's just the way it is. But so then cameras, they will be horrible for the peak velocity on the traditional list, because they happen at the top, right? So if that's happening at the top, well, they only have a frame rate of 30 times per second, right? So you're going to miss that most likely. So you have a good mean, but a poor peak. Conversely, the Olympic weightlifting movement, the peak happens at the top of the second pole, and then you catch it. Well, so they'll miss the catch, but they'll catch the peak. that sounds funny. So they miss the catch, but they will recognize where the peak velocity occurred at that top of the second pole. So then peak is accurate and average is not. And it just, kind of goes in with that. And each one of them is going to calculate things differently. And now we've even got lasers like, the Flex, how it's using the light reflection as to judge the distance from the ground, instead of a tape measure or a tether. So then that, and even the tethers, there's going to be some issues with some of the different tether devices. If they use a cheap potentiometer, they get on, what is it that I just got stupid stuff on AliExpress or something, and you get a potentiometer from there. Some of them, they have a extremely high error rate, as was evidenced by the most recent publication by me, and I did not expect that at all. But Sergio Lamas, I believe he was the driving force on that one. And it was my work with Francesco Travasio. It's a project that we did down at University of Miami with aerospace engineers, which it's awesome to be able to work with people that are on that level. It's like, holy cow. It's like, I've got this idea. I know this, but I can't do it. And they're like, oh, that's easy here. And it's done. So, the different measurement systems make for a lot of differences within velocities too. So that's really pushed me to like, hey, if we're going to describe training and we are going to look at things through a training lens, maybe we ought to start looking more at and I hate doing this, right? Because I come from a team sport background, but the cost of the devices has even gotten so much that the individual user can get it now.
Yeah.
So with that, I always just kind of, question myself, which is the right way to do things. The way that I do VBT with the zones, I did it because it was room management. I have 100 guys. It would be nothing to have 40, 50 guys on the floor at one time with just a couple of coaches. Yeah. So I'm not going to be able to remember 40 or 50 individual, load velocity relationships. But if it's good enough, we can go out and throw that down. I mean, that's one of the things that from reading Verkhoshansky for all those years, gosh, I started reading him in 99. So a quarter century looking at him, I mean, and the other Soviets, they got to good enough and they didn't discover the underlying mechanisms or anything. They're just like, hey, I know that these are the results. Bam, let's move on. And that's what I did with VBT. It's like, okay, this is on average what we're at. Great. And that's where the zones came from. And it was on squat and deadlift and bench press. And why did I do it on bench press, even though it's got a different 1RM? Because bench press doesn't really matter for most sports. Oh my gosh.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah. And people take shots at me over that. And
you're going to stand on that?
Yeah, I'm going to stand on it because,
Okay.
I've never seen anybody walk onto the court on their hands, man. And whenever I see that, maybe I'll start caring more about the bench press. And for a powerlifter to say that, it's like sacrilege, but it is what it is. So a lot of the times what I've started to go towards is looking at the individual load velocity relationships and layering power in there.
Okay.
Right. So, the device, let's just take a quick little math lesson for some of the listeners. If they've got a device that only gives velocity, and there's some of them that are out there that will only give velocity. If you multiply the load in kilograms by the acceleration of gravity, 9.81, you have force. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Right.
And force is just that mass times acceleration. So I put in mass, acceleration of gravity, there's my force. Well, we know power is force times velocity. Yeah. So if I just multiply that by the velocity that I achieved, I've got my power number. Yeah. So that, it's super simple to just, math it out. That's all that it really is. And then look at where that peak power occurs, that load at which peak power occurs. And not even, I care about the velocity too, but because of the differential measurements from the devices, I really like looking at the percentage of 1RM. Now, why I like looking at that is because there have been a lot of researchers who went out and looked for optimal load. Now, one thing that I always struggled with for me was optimal compared to what? Now, in their research, they were defining optimal as the load at which peak power occurred. Okay. And they've done that in multiple populations. Greg Hoff and I have no idea what Kawamori's first name was, and I'm probably greatly mispronouncing that. But they had a great paper decades ago about the different loads at which peak power occurred for different exercises and populations. And if you use that as a guideline, right? And it says on there, and I'm going to throw some numbers out. Don't I don't want anybody saying, oh, well, Dr. Mann was looking at this chart. Nah, man, I'm pulling this out of my wazoo right now. But let's say that we know that peak power is supposed to happen at 30%, 37% of a squat for a rugby player, a senior national rugby player, and you're hitting it at 60%.
Sure.
Well, let's take some extra context there. Are you weaker than a kitten? Okay, no, you're already strong. Okay, well, you're supposed to be hitting it at 37. You're hitting it at 60. How about we start pushing some velocity at 50% to try and move that peak power one direction or another? Now, but the direction I'm trying to move it is more towards the velocity end of the spectrum. So just trying to give them that little push on along. I mean, if we're just hitting peak power and that's the only thing that we're doing, great, you're displaying how much power you can produce, but you're not causing a physiological difference, in my opinion, from what I've seen. It's got to be that you're pushing more towards that trait. So that's what I would be looking at and seeing, okay, let's use this context. Who is this person? Where do they need to be? Okay, where are they now? And let's push them towards that. Now, I used to think that the load velocity relationship was completely concrete and would never change. And then as I started looking at things, I realized, dude, I'm kind of wrong here, but it still fits in with the zones. And what I mean by I'm wrong here is that whenever people do a lot of heavy lifting, they're not balancing everything out. They're just doing a lot of heavy strength training all the time. They actually push themselves more and more towards the force end of the spectrum. Now, we've got publications out in aging and in Parkinson's now that shows that using, training more towards the velocity end of the spectrum will absolutely increase the velocity at which somebody hits peak power, and it could decrease the load at which they hit peak power. It's like, wait a second, we're dropping the load? Yeah, we're dropping the load because there's an inverse relationship between load and velocity. So we're getting more and more towards those fast twitchy muscles turning on, that those actually change as a result of training. So I've seen in my own athletes that there is a difference that I can remember the squat 1RM stuff off the top of my head because I cared. It was 0.36 for freshmen, 0.32 for sophomores, 0.28 for juniors, 0.25 for seniors, was their 1RM velocity. So they obviously had a decrease in velocity each year as a result of training, and they gained what's called neuromuscular efficiency. Now, somebody might be like, wait, you just said moving slow is more efficient. Well, if moving a heavy weight is your goal, then yes, moving slow is more efficient because I can continue to push without failing. So I'm able to achieve that. Conversely, the velocity end of the spectrum, I am moving faster. And if I'm moving faster, well, power equals force times velocity. And people be like, well, acceleration's in there. It's like, yeah, but mass has got a bigger impact for force. Velocity has a bigger impact for power. So, just what's deficient. So we need to attack things and find what the low-hanging fruit is by looking at force, velocity, and power for the individual in a absolute and normalized way. Now, what do I mean by absolute and normalized? Absolute would just mean how much force was there, how much velocity was there, how much power was there. And the relative is looking at what was the percentage of your velocity that you hit? What is your, whenever you hit peak power, what percentage of force and what percentage of velocity were you at? Right. And that's going to help you to be able to look and kind of differentiate that. And I like using because I know how to do it for the individual, but I still think like a team coach. And then you could use the generalities of the team to drive that. For instance, we saw that at Miami, we had 4 All-Americans who were all the way at the velocity. The freaking velocities were off the charts. And they were hitting peak power at like 35%, but most of the athletes were hitting peak power at around 60%. So it's like, okay, for these guys, we're doing 30% and we're going to do jumps because we can't have them slow down, or we're going to do high band resistance. For y'all over at 60%, okay, great. Let's start doing, squatting at 50% and, see what we can do to bump that up. And power went up, and it went up pretty good for each person. I can't remember what the change was. Because honestly, we didn't do it the best. Sport, if you're actually researching active sport, it's dirty. It's not this clean. If you did, oh gosh, how should I explain this? That, we do, it's a controlled environment. Well, it's not.
Yeah.
The coach is going to tell him, okay, go up 15 pounds, you go up 5. Well, he went up 5, he went up 15. That's not congruent. So then it starts to get dirty. So that's why some of the stuff I'm never going to publish, because I get laughed at. I'll get laughed at from the reviewers, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because and that's one of those times whenever we've got to make sure we understand what are we trying to do.
Yeah.
What population are we actually trying to do? If we're trying to deal with elite level athletes, you get what you get, right? I can't go out and recruit let's say there's 13 people on the basketball team and I need 35 to reach statistical significance. Where the fuck am I going to get the other 22?
Yeah,
So
right.
it's so things, statistically, you got to look a little bit more at the effect size. Magnitude-based inference really took up from that. So you've got just some dirtier things. But yeah, I really like looking at that peak power because of all those different changes and seeing how that person goes and looking how we can drive that. So that's, whenever you get down to it, that's one of the main things that I've started doing and looking at. And it was honestly a big part of it was working with Joe Signorelli. And, at University of Miami, that guy, while there are a lot of people that are a lot more well-known, I don't know if there's anybody that has done more for the aging and Parkinson's population than him. He was a guy that challenged the, oh my God, I can't remember their names, but it was like, well, strength is the only thing old people need to do. And he's like, bullshit. I'm going to go do this. And our results were as good, if not better, than they were for just the heavy resistance training. It's like, oh my gosh, you mean the body has more than one system? Holy cow. It was like, a light bulb for some people, but, and it, was for me, just seeing the way that he did those things. And I never would have done it and started looking at it in that manner if it weren't for him, because I had it good enough. It's like, oh, okay, well, what are you going to do if somebody isn't hitting their peak power at about 1 meter per second on squat? Probably recruit a different player, because that guy sucks. And, it's just different. So, and then that changed my viewpoint. And I think that the thing that I've done the most is got out of my own comfort zone and expanded out into different areas and looked and tried to apply those back to sports. So I'm going both ways, right? What I mean by that is that I'm applying from sport to special populations and general populations and the tactical populations now here at Texas A&M. And then I'm also taking some of that stuff that the other researchers did with that aging population and with those special populations and applying those statistical methodologies to sport. And it's like, holy cow. I would say I probably do more for the applications towards other things than I've taken from the elderly. But dude, I wouldn't have changed if it weren't for that. So one of the things I always try and get people to do is to go do something outside of your comfort zone. Work with somebody different, work with a different team, work with a different sport, and keep your mind open. Because there's going to be a lot of things that you just don't know, and you don't know that you don't know them yet.
Yeah.
And if you can use that as a growth opportunity as opposed to just a frustration, which I struggle with too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect. But I think that's where growth occurs. Growth occurs when you're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I felt like I was the biggest idiot in the room there for the first 2 years at Miami. And then I realized, well, I'm not that big of an idiot. If I just do it this way, I'm right. And so, there we go. Now, one thing that I think people have messed up with in VBT is the lack of attention to technique. Golly, so many times I watch online, somebody will send me a video and like, hey, look, and, a clean looks like, I have no idea what the heck that was, but it wasn't really a clean. But the person is so dialed into the velocity, that's all that they care about. It wasn't a true hang coming from above the knee. It was actually clean from the mid shins and not on the ground. And that would have a different velocity than this. And then they jumped all the way back with a lateral lunge and damn near caught the bar on the back of their head, or on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I don't know what exercise that was, but it wasn't what you said. So I think that everybody needs to start looking at pay attention to technique first, and people shouldn't be using velocity until they're already strong. And I can't reiterate that enough. Yeah, I'm going to be wrong for about 3% of the population, but I'll take that to be right for 97%.
So if you would click, give me just a little bit more detail there. Like, you hear, the general rules of thumb of 2 times the body weight is where they thought. Is that entry point, or is that like, that's just as strong as you need to be, period? How does that work? And by the way, let me slip in one quick thing, because I thought this is an interesting anecdote. There was an athlete that I think was training with Dr. Bondarchuk. This is probably over a decade ago, and he only used velocity type of training for 3 years and never used any real strength training. And I think the bench press went from 300 to 400 in those 3 years using only velocity stuff. So I'm going to use that as kind of a background. This, because this was secondhand to me. That I was just talking with them and kind of listening to those stories. How do you, when you say, look, you need to be strong enough, what do you mean by that? And could you apply it to the population, which most of us deal with, which is high school and college, I guess?
I still use double body weight as strong enough.
And now, but that's not the entry point. Like, when you say strong, you need to be strong before you use velocity. Does that mean?
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So entry point, I'd say, is about 1.7. Is
1.7. And then 2.0 is, hey, look, from this point, I'm going to make sure I understand what you're saying. From 2.0 and above, there's no need for you to lift heavy again.
I wouldn't say that.
That's what I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that there's no point, because I would go back to, it depends on how the training is structured, right? And I'll be honest, if it's American football today, because of the short time blocks, I'd say, get up to maybe 2.3, 2.4, and then why mess with it? Because we don't have 16, 18, 20 week training blocks, right? Where we can really, dive in and develop things like Yuri used to.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say not is because I have seen athletes continue to improve power and speed up to a triple body weight squat, but those were outliers. So it does still happen, right? But it's not with the same frequency. So I would look and see, hey, you know what's going on to their speed? What's going on to their power? If it's still tracking the same direction that we want it to, fine, screw it. Just let them get stronger. Everybody is an N of 1. The
so
research.
You're still following where the evidence is showing where the.
Oh my God, yeah.
You're not being. It's not a dogmatic thing.
No. It went 25 years ago. It would have been straight dogma. If it didn't come from Louis or come from Yesus or come from Zatsiorski or Kurz or Verkoshansky, it was an abomination. But now I look at I just look at the results.
Yeah,
and
right.
Are we
results always?
Yeah. Is power going up? And honestly, some of the reasons why I do it now differently than I used to is because I understand analysis so much better. It's like, okay, well, how much does power go up? Well, did it go up enough? Well, what's enough? Well, the smallest worthwhile change. What's that? What is that, like a half a standard deviation? You want that to be more than like 5%. So are they improving 5%? Great. Keep it going, because 1 watt, that's not improvement.
Right.
But some people, I would have looked at it that way before in black and white. And what we have to realize is sport is gray. But I'll keep things going down that same rabbit hole until the well dries up, man. If they're getting stronger and they're getting faster and jumping higher and putting on muscle mass, and that's something that they need to do, and they're increasing momentum and maintaining speed, dude, let's keep going. Why change? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
That's the way that I look at it. Now that would have been different in the past, and sometimes I think I look at things a little bit more critically on the individual basis than I used to, because now, being a researcher, I have more time. I'm not spending 50 hours on the floor and 60 hours on the floor and then another 20, 30, 40 covering through data. So you got to make it super easy, super yes, no, black, white. This is true, this is false, to where you can start to look at it from that 35,000-foot view and be like, okay, well, trap bar makes his stuff go up. Back squat goes up for this guy and everything goes nuts, but trap bar doesn't go anywhere. Oh, okay, let's get this guy work on the trap bar and this other guy's working on the back squat. Great, keep him going. Who cares? You know, whereas before it used to be, well, they must squat at this level at this point in time, and they should not change variation until just get them give them what works, man.
That I don't want to get off on a side note, but that is exactly. I was talking with Anatoly about this. I don't know. He calls me, fairly frequently. We'll just chew the fat about whatever. And he said, he goes, look, he goes, I asked him with Yuri Sadiq in 1985. Sadiq's results went down. And then the next year he came back and then he blew the world record away, right? And I said, what happened? You'd been coaching him for over a decade at that point. What happened? He goes, I guessed wrong.
Yeah.
No, and that was, and he wasn't like, I guessed wrong. And what he said was, when I've asked him before, when we talked about that, he said, look, what I'm trying to always do is I'm trying to figure out what exercises work the best with this athlete. And then the bigger thing, he said, more complicated thing, what combinations of exercises work the best with this athlete. And he said, and then when you know that, he said, you can't run it all year long because it's the body adapts. So he said, you got to figure out what that is and then save it for when you need it, when you're looking for that, getting ready for a competition kind of thing. But he said, he goes, certain exercises with a guy he responds really well to, other ones he doesn't. He said you leave them earlier in the year when you're not, getting ready for necessarily for a competition.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you're finding in reality. And I want, the reason why I say this, because I think this is an important point for people to make.
Yeah.
You've been doing this for a while now. You've been in this for over 25 years. And now what's interesting is you went from the science crossed over into the art.
Yeah.
Of coaching. And I remember Natalia, she's told me this many times. She goes, coaching at the elite level, she said, is more of an art than a science.
Absolutely.
Because now you're going on your experience and you're looking at the nuance of things instead of, well, this is the rule and this is how it has to be, taking it directly from the book. Well, my experience says that's not always true. And I got to, you know what I mean? And so what Anatoly said, he said many times, he goes, you look at something, he goes, you try it. He goes, and then you always criticize what you're doing. Well, maybe I should change that. He said, and then you always go back and look at the result of the event. And did that change anything? Right. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing for yourself, even like at the stage of the career where you're crossing over from just the science over into the other side. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And, and I came to it from a different conclusion than Anatoly did, because I really started going to that whenever it's funny, whenever I started teaching kinesiology. And calling it kinesiology is an overstatement. It was really, I would say, functional anatomy. And then I started looking at the levers and how they have to work differently, right? And, of course, we've got pelvis breadth, the depth of the socket, of the hip, right? The angle of inclination of the femoral neck, the twist, anteversion, retroversion on the femoral neck, right? The length of the femoral neck, then we've got the bowing of the femur, if there is any. Then we also have the femur to tibia ratios. Then we've also got tibial torsion to take into account. I mean, we've got all of these freaking anatomical factors that go in towards just something like squat depth.
Yeah.
And we've got to look at individual variations, because person A, well, they might be set up perfect for a back squat and they're in a great position and they can push that very naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, person B, they might have some, super short femur, long tibia, and long torso. And whenever they squat, they've got to be low barred and bent all the way over to just keep the thing on their back.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we forcing the same exercise? Just see if it looks good and then progress it from there. The progressions need to go away from, and dude, I've always been a proponent of progressions and having and I still am, having some list to go on, base your progression upon, because that makes sense. Well, we also have to realize that, dude, I feel real comfortable driving in a Accord or a truck. You put me in a Ferrari and I have no idea how the heck to do it. So, you know how to go in your own body. You don't know how to go in other people's. So we got to pay attention and make sure that it looks right and it flies right. Because if it don't look right, it don't fly right, as Charlie Francis used to say. So let's, make sure that everybody, that their movement looks good, their technique is solid, and then let make changes based upon that rather than willy-nilly based upon what your coach had you do 25 years ago.
Right. I'm gonna give you one other real quick question. When you were talking about, entry point and then high end on the strength component. Something that I've talked to, I think Hank was the one that when I first talked about it with somebody about rotating, like if you're in a cycle of using velocity based training, and then every fourth training session he would use a strength day.
Yeah,
we're slower. Can you talk about that real quickly, just like advantages or disadvantages, or like when and why?
Well, gosh, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it, right? And the way that Hank's doing it, Hank, excuse me, I always thinking about, Hank, let's talk about your daddy. That's where I always go to, but I know it's Hank. Yeah, right?
Hank Williams.
Yeah. But what I think that he's getting at is, and it kind of goes back to Shuren's work with the residuals, that, if you are hitting every 2 weeks, you hit an 80%, you're going to be maintaining, 95, 100% of your strength. Right. So then he's velocity, strength. And I mean, that's not anything different than what Fred Roll was doing at Kansas back in the 90s, when Kansas was actually good in multiple athletic sports other than just basketball. It would be dynamic effort day. And then sometimes after the dynamic effort, well, actually every dynamic effort, they might go up and hit a 72 and a 77 and then a 75 and an 80, hitting it so that every, couple of sessions they'd be getting over that. Sure. That's great for maintenance of strength. And I think that that's fantastic. And it also gives the body a different stimulus. So now it's not just thinking speed. Oh shit, this other stuff's still important. I got to hold on to it. I think that's a great way to do it. And one of the things that I think why it worked so well for Hank is that Hank was doing most of his training at 60%, which has that equal force and velocity component. So then whenever he goes up and he hits that force day, well, he's already kind of ready for it from being at 60%, and then go on from there. So yeah, it's great for the change of the stimulus to the nervous system and for the maintenance of the myosin, the myosin, what is it? Heavy chain myosin. So that it's maintaining its width and breadth, because the diameter of the myosin is what's most directly related to force production capabilities. So he's maintaining the myosin while training the nervous system, and for rate coding, he's just getting multiple bangs for his buck, as I would assume would be happening for somebody who has swept the podium at multiple world championships in the sprints.
Right. To me, it made sense. Like, even if the guy is really strong, periodically touching that from, like you said, from multiple viewpoints. And one is just, it's a different stimulus.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't understand this maybe as well as they should. Like Anatoly, is him and I talked, and Ducky has the same thing. Like, sometimes just something different for the sake of stimulus. It doesn't have to be any other super complex reason other than let's just give them something a little different. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
All the fundamentals are there. Don't get me wrong, not just something stupid, but like, something within that realm of makes sense. Yeah, let's just give them something different just to see if we can spur some more adaptation. Because as you go along further and further with an athlete, less and less things work as easily as they used to. And I wanted to get as you're talking, we're gonna have to do this again because as you're talking, more and more questions are coming to my mind as to, things that don't appear to me when I'm watching other people that are getting applied, correctly. When there's a difference when using velocity, and you talked about the 60% portion. If you have a 16-year-old kid or you have a 30-year-old, pro, let's say NFL player, that 60% is probably going to render different velocities. Am I correct?
Most likely, yeah. The 60% for the lesser trained person will probably be slower than for the elite level athlete. Assuming that that the 16-year-old hasn't been training since like age 8 or something like he's,
right.
in the Chinese or old Russian systems.
Right. I even saw this with my middle son that you and I, you helped me with a little bit. And what we found when we first started attempting to use velocity, he hit 0.8 meters per second at around 45%.
Yeah.
Give or take. Between 45 and 50, I think is what went. And I was estimating that based off of his, his 8 rep set. But
right.
And it seems to me now that that gap is closed. Now later on, since he's been doing it for a little while. So I think that's one thing that is interesting, and I think that maybe there's a misconception about, because a lot of all of the scientists, all the guys who've written books for me, their conversations were only about elite athletes.
Yeah, and it's different.
They never wrote for the college athlete. And a lot of people think because you have a really good college player that he's an elite athlete, and that's not what that's not what they meant by elite. Not elite genetics, but elite training. Could you talk about give me a quick explanation as to how that, how somebody should hear what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I guess the way that they should see it is that I guess it's kind of like that. I'm not a Bible guy, but I can remember that there's a time and a place for everything, a time for war, a time for peace, a time for work, a time for rest. Well, there's at different points in time, you have got different capabilities that have got to be filled, right? And those, that's what Bondarchuk and Verkhoshansky and even Yesis would call like the GPP movements, right? Getting the cross-sectional area of the muscle bigger. That's a general physical preparedness. And once that hits its quota, you're not going to get anything more from it. Mm-hmm. So why keep milking that same exercise? And I was flipping, and I closed it. I was flipping through my book because I was trying to be like, oh, I've actually got something that kind of goes along these lines. Here it is on page 15, showing the differences in our vertical jump powers. And you notice that at year 3 to 4, they stagnated. It's like, well, why did they stagnate? We didn't change the exercise. We milked all that we were going to milk from those exercises, and we didn't change them. It's like, how come you're saying that so confidently now? Well, because I got 15 years of data that I look back through, and I know what we did, and I know that. And also, it's like, hey, one of the things that people have to realize too is that in strength and conditioning, it's not just what you want to have done. Sometimes you have to. Not sometimes, your sport coach is going to have input into things too. And, there was Bill Snyder and Rod Cole at Kansas State University. Well, rumor has it, before Rod Cole was at K-State with Coach Snyder, he loved to back squat. Well, Coach Snyder said, you're not putting a straight bar on my guy's back. So he went to a safety bar. Big deal, right? You got to do the same. Right? Yeah. So you got to, maybe he didn't like the safety bar as much as he liked the straight bar, but you got your sport coach that comes into it too. So the sport coach might have something like, you are doing this workout because I did it under my head coach and I thought that it worked. So you're going to have to do that. So you don't even have everything all to yourself. So sometimes, your growth is going to be stunted because of the parameters that are forced upon you by the people who sign the check. And yeah, if you want to go against them, that's fine. They're like, I'm going down, sticking to my guns. Go ahead, right on over the unemployment line.
At your own peril. I got Jeff Moyer fired that way.
Yeah.
And I got him fired. I had to get him a new job. That's how he ended up in Pittsburgh. I got him fired in New York, so I found him another gig in Pittsburgh.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's quick. It was just they asked for our help. We helped. They went undefeated for 2 years, and they lost like in a playoff game, whatever. But they had went from 3-8 to undefeated. Closest margin of victory was like our average margin of victory was 28 points. So they're winning, right? They're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an absolute phenomenal turnaround. Head coach says, "Listen, we got to Olympic lift because the team that beat us, that's what they do." So Jeff called me. He says, "What should I tell him?" I said, "Tell him no."
Yeah.
And that was the end of the story.
Yep.
And now Jeff's in Pittsburgh, but it ended up working out okay. But yeah, you've got to be, you've got to. There's those parameters. Whether or not the sport coach has any idea, which 99.99999% of the time he has no idea what he's talking about. But if that's what he believes in and what he feels, what are you going to do? He's the one that's signing your check, and that's definitely it. All right, I got a couple other quick ones that I want to put on you real quick.
Yep.
When you're talking about squatting, full squat or half squat, how is that measured? What's the standard?
Well, I could tell you what the standard is, and I could tell you what my opinion is now.
Tell me both.
Okay, so the standard was based upon the decision between a baseball scout and 2 other individuals for determining the rules of the depth of the squat as an offshoot from Olympic weightlifting for the AAU, which was crease of the hip below the knee. Why? Because everybody had a knee, everybody had a hip, and if it dips below that, then great.
It's easy to measure.
It's easy to measure, right? Not as easy as obviously as the bench press or deadlift. Nobody ever is like, well, that bench wasn't low enough. Well, actually, maybe now because they changed the rules. I had to back away from powerlifting because my joints can't handle it anymore. And I fucking still love it. I still want to do it. So I got to stay away from it or else I want to hurt myself again. For those that don't know, I'm just 6 weeks out from a hip replacement.
Yeah, you got bionic parts now.
Yeah,
you got to be a little more careful.
Yeah. And for me, and I think I might have stolen this from you or Cal. I don't remember. But for me, what I look at now is just let's squat based upon foot placement and let's squat them down until their technique drops. And what do I mean by their technique drop? Well, typically for most people, it's posterior tilt. So you look for some flexion of the lumbar spine. It's like, how come we're looking at the lumbar spine and not the hip? Hey, Dodo, do you realize that the sacrum is just fused vertebrae? And what is the sacrum? Oh, it's a part of the pelvis. The pelvis and the spine are connected and linked. So I can see at that lumbar spine, if there's any bit of flexion, I know that that pelvis is posteriorly tilted because I have a issue with the mobility. What is the issue with the mobility? Could it be the socket depth? Could it be angle of inclination? Could it be muscular? Could it be a bony block, a bone spur? Could it be a problem at the ankle? Yeah, it could be any of those. So we just squat them down and with a certain width of stance. And then when it looks like crap, you have them go up a little bit higher than that.
Yeah. What I've used as a rule of thumb is depth to the point of butt linking. I think that's like
that's basically what I at the end of the day. That's the more common term. Yeah, and I can't.
What you explained.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the term, or else I would have said it. Yeah.
So if you're butt winking, what I tell everybody, I said, listen, once you're butt winking, your back's doing a lot of the work out of that. I mean, your back's doing the work back up until the pelvis comes back into its normal position.
Yeah.
And that's a tremendous amount of load on really small muscles and a lot of inter-abdominal pressure.
And dude, on top of that, how do you herniate a disc? Well, what's the mechanism? Well, it's flexion under load. And what is a butt wink? Flexion.
Under a tremendous load.
And if I'm squatting heavy, it's a tremendous load. Exactly.
And the lever can be really long if the athlete's a little taller. That lever can be incredible. So basically, my thought on that is correct, that it's just down to the level of where they start to lose that technique and that butt wink begins.
Yeah. So what I do is I start off the year squatting a little bit wider than the shoulders.
Yeah.
And then I'll go inside the shoulders. I'll go at armpits, and then I'll go at hip width. And and I progress that through the year. That's how I do it. And that does that cause issues with reliability of 1RMs and all this other stuff? Well, yeah, but why are you testing the 1RM anyways?
Yeah.
Right. As long as you're doing it consistent, then you know if they got stronger or weaker. That's really all that we care about. If we really and truly want to look at force producing capabilities, let's get them on a force plate and let's just do an isometric, because that's going to take that takes. I haven't published this. I need to do it. And I need to do it again in a more controlled setting where we're actually controlling knee angle. But I've done it to where we give 3 minutes rest, and I've done it to where we give 30 seconds rest. And if we're doing just 2 attempts on an isometric mid-thigh pull at 3 or 6 seconds, given 30 seconds in between is enough time that they restore their phosphocreatine stores, their neurotransmitters get wiped out quick enough that they're able to maintain. Now, if we were doing 3 reps, 30 seconds in between, no, that you're gonna wipe out unless you're taking creatine, and that's something that I've noted just anecdotally. I haven't actually done a study on that part yet, but I need to recreate that we can give 30 seconds in between. Now, why am I going on and on about that? Hey, in 36 seconds, I can tell if you're strong enough or if you got stronger. How long does it take to do a 1RM on a squat?
Yeah, right.
30 minutes. And then beyond that, how long are you blown up for? Well, the stronger the person is, the longer they're blown up for. I know that for the super strong dudes, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, their nervous system's trashed and they're like, I'm not coming back. Why aren't my legs moving right?
Yeah.
With an isometric, 30 minutes.
Yeah, and you're back.
So, why are we looking at the squat? Is it golly, I'm trying to think of the best word for it. Nobody's going to be listening to this point anyways. Is it a dick? Are we doing it because it's a dick measuring contest?
Yeah, right.
Or are we doing it because we want to see if there was an actual change?
Yeah.
So let's care more about the actual change than ego, because ego gets people hurt. Yeah. It just does.
It's not there's no return on investment. I've said that. Like when people ask me, especially it's a lot of it's at the high school or college level, and I'm like, look, it like for what? We've got all these other like if we know where you're at, your 80% is, we can extrapolate the rest of it, because the 1RM really doesn't really matter otherwise in the scheme of things for the sport, because you have to display that over and over again anyway. So
yeah,
it's just like look, you're making a huge leap from that. To predict something else, right? You're making an enormous leap that isn't rational. Okay,
I'd rather look at power, sprinting, and momentum as opposed to 1RMs. It doesn't matter.
And that leads me to the one last question for today. But I got to get you down again here in the next couple of months, because all kinds of questions came to mind while we're doing this. But here's one. I'm practical, so everybody knows I don't have a degree in the field, no qualifications, no certifications. I just happen to be at the right place at the right time with the right people, Yeah. Like Bob Eilenfeld used to say, my qualification is I have the best Rolodex in the world.
I miss that dude.
I love Bob. He was good. And he was not a guy who handed out compliments. And,
no.
And he said, look, bro, he said, you have the best Rolodex in the world, or at least in the United States. And I never thought of it. And I'm like, yeah, that kind of is true. I mean, it doesn't say anything about me. It just says that I was lucky. But I've always viewed everything through the one lens that makes a lot of people in your area, it offends them. What are the results? Yeah. The metrics. So how should somebody look at this? And I remember I asked you when I think you were still at Missouri. I asked you, I said, okay, when you changed over and you guys started looking at velocity instead of lifting heavier, what did that change? And you, if I remember correctly, you correct me if I'm wrong, you said that you saw an extra 2 inches in vertical jump over what you had seen, and that was like every off season, correct?
Well, I mean, yes, for the same training ages. That peters out. you know, that we would
Oh,
see
sure,
like an
sure.
extra 2 inches for the freshman to sophomore to junior or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look to see which year it was. But yeah, no, and then it did peter out by their senior year. But no, we were getting higher vertical jumps. And then even the seniors who were used to gaining, you know, nothing and maybe even regress a little bit, or their
Yeah.
power would regress a little bit, they were continuing to increase.
Yeah.
Wasn't much now, but dude, we were at a full tank. That's
Yeah.
like, you know, pulling the little nozzle handle and waiting until the gas overflows. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's all we were doing right then.
So did you guys ever get any idea or numbers on it, what you thought how it changed speed, or was that too messy?
On how it changed speed, the
Like
sprinting
if you're
speed.
looking at
Oh
40
man,
times, was that too messy of a thing to
that's
try
too
to?
messy. You know, the research has shown multiple times that yeah, squat just simply getting stronger and doing things in the vertical axis does facilitate an improvement in lesser qualified athletes. But whenever you get up to college, 18, 19, 20-year olds that have consistently trained, there is absolutely no relationship between that's bad to say. Let me back that up. That the relationship for improvements in squatting to lead to improvements in speed diminishes after about that freshman year.
Sure. And that
Right.
and that ergo, that's where the Oklahoma State study kind of proved that
Yeah. Yeah.
things weren't improving the way they thought. Now, I would assume though that if the athlete is also running and he's also using a jump progression that makes a lot of sense,
Mm-hmm.
and he's using those in combination, and he's also using his specialized exercises and stuff, that the velocity based stuff is facilitating those things, and like, you know, in a different way than if he was lifted heavy. Like that
Yeah.
can be the background that you want.
Yeah, you know, it comes back down to, and God, I gave a presentation. Oh, I don't know. Did I actually give that presentation for Jay? I don't remember, but it
No, you
was
didn't, because I think that was that last year, and we can't, and it got canceled. Was
no,
that
this was
last year?
years ago. No,
Oh,
this was
okay.
years ago. Yeah, and I don't remember what I did with that presentation then. I probably ought to do something with it, but
Well, that back out.
yeah, shoot, I forgot. Oh, it was basically knowing where the results came from.
Yeah.
You know, what is the physiological process for this? So, like the super heavy lifting, you're getting size principle. You know, you're able to recruit the high threshold motor units. Is it cross sectional area for force? Okay, well then that's going to be repetitive effort method, and then and then if we're looking at VBT and ballistics, right? Not plyometrics, but
Yeah.
ballistics. Well, that's enhancing rate coding. You know how fast that signal is being sent down.
Right.
If you're talking about sprinting, well, we've got you got to change the calcium release from the golly, what is it called? Calcium induced calcium. I got to teach physiology here starting next week, so I better get good at this.
You better think you get bummed up.
That you know, you go from a calcium-induced calcium release to a voltagely gated, so that it's coming from the electrical impulse that causes the calcium to release. And sprinting is the only activity that's fast enough to do that. And then, of course, we've got the stuff from the parallel elastic component, where I should say plyometric, but really everybody would know what a shock method would be important to enhance there. So really, it's about determining what is the low-hanging fruit for this individual. And then bringing that up. And then there's going to be a point in time where it's none of those base physiological stuff. And that's what, you know, Bondarchuk, yes, as Verkhoshansky, we're really getting to with those laws of dynamic correspondence, that there's going to be a point when these basic things don't matter anymore. And what's going to enhance it? Those special exercises with joint angle specificity, link tension relationships, biomechanical specificity, you know, getting towards that pattern with the laws of dynamic correspondence. You know, that's whenever it happens.
That's where it gets to. Well, and that brings us to the last. I'll just share this because this is and one of the things that I learned from them verbally, not in writing. I remember this. It was about 15. It was more than 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. Dr. Estes and I were talking about it, and he said, look, you know, he said general exercise is a point where they no longer apply. They don't apply at all.
Yeah.
And Anatoly has said as much. Same thing. And Yuri, I don't know if he said it quite as concisely, but yeah, same idea. And Dr. Essen said, he goes, here's what's the difference. He said, general exercises eventually will no longer be very useful. He said, but there is no upper limit to improvement in specialized exercises. He said, they always will have some transference. Now, obviously, that'll decline over
Yeah.
time. But he said, they don't, he said, they don't have an absolute hard ceiling. I thought that was really interesting and encouraging, so that if you have an athlete and you've had him for quite a while, that you can still make good progress leaning on those types of, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but we also have to realize the context of the situation. So how many people did Yuri work with at a time and Doc work with at a
Yeah,
time?
right.
Very small numbers,
Yeah, very small.
single digits.
Yeah.
So then you'd be able to dial in and hit those with the team environments. And I am very interested to see what's going to shake out, at least the NCAA and wise about how everything's going right now. But when you get 5 coaches for 125, 130 people, there's
No
trying to
bueno.
figure out. Yeah. So how do people determine special exercise? Well, they watch their event, they break it down by film, then they determine what is the weakness on the film, and then they develop they determine, is it a muscular strength, is it a coordination issue, what is it, and then they develop the exercises to fix that. It's not just everybody goes and does which I've hear from people all the time, like, oh no, I'm doing special exercises. And the good ones that are doing special exercises, yeah, they're doing the knee drive and paw back. Great. Those are going to have a limited transfer at some point too, and then you're going to have to find the next thing. So yeah, it's in the individual, I agree 100%. In the team setting,
much harder.
It's
yeah.
I agree that it could happen, but how to do it, you're going to be working 120 hours a week.
I had the incredible good fortune of having the guy who invented some of the exercises teach them to me. So that way, that was so much easier. Like if you were shooting in the dark as to what you think that the technique is on something, it's tough. Like because it looks easy after the fact. You know what I mean? When you look at the leader, oh yeah, I get that. But before it was done, it wasn't as simple or as obvious to everyone. You know what I mean? Like in some of his other exercises that were more complicated, maybe smaller movements or whatever. Yeah, it looks simple, but somebody had to think of it first. It's like everything else,
Oh God, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, but if you're out there trying to determine yourself what the specialized exercise should be for some particular skill, that gets real dicey. And especially, I'm one-on-one with athletes primarily, or one-on-two when I'm working with them, and it is a full-time job making sure that the technique is done, and it keeps being repeatedly done correctly. So, yeah, so. I'm going to keep running my mouth here, but we're going to get back together. And one thing that I think that Dr. Bondarchuk said that is something that you could appreciate as well. I asked him, I said, what's the future of athletics? Like, what's the future of all this? What does it hinge on? He said, we have to have better exercises. He said, that's it. He said, the exercise got to get better. And he said, and so it goes back to what you were just saying. Like, we got to figure out a better way of making good application onto the movements and for the skills that we want to improve.
Yeah, dude. And, on those lines, like the advice that I give to people that I give now is I've done a lot for this field. But you know what? I'm not going to be able to take it further than the next person. The next person's going to be able to take it further than me because of the things that I did, and they can build upon that. Absolutely. It's I can only, Jonathan Weekly has done wonders for VBT. And he will continue to do wonders for VBT because he's taken, where I left off. And I don't think he's that much younger than me, to be honest with you. He's just way smarter than me. He's taken what I did and he's built upon it and found like, okay, this is great. This might be better. This does not as good as you thought. And he's able to go on because he's looking at it from a different viewpoint. The only way that I'm ever going to be able to see a problem is through my own eyes. And it's whenever you look at somebody else's work through your eyes where you can see and change and just don't think that this person is a deity. The people who put me up on a pedestal, you're wrong, man. You're wrong. I make mistakes all the time. I am about as dumb as a brick. I've had a couple of good ideas.
Don't shoot down all of my stuff at one time. Like down easily.
Yeah, so
I had you up there.
Yeah, I just got to, everybody's, Yes, this was human. You know,
Oh,
obviously,
absolutely.
Zatsyorsky was human.
Yeah.
Is human.
Yeah.
Shurin was human.
Yes. Yeah.
Dude, Stone, Kramer, we're all freaking people. And the only thing
Yeah.
that separates some of them is, I'm not going there. I think that some of the people, they they might get confused by their own bullshit sometimes. And that might make you think that they think for
Yes.
God because they put themselves out at it. But holy cow, everybody's going to die. Everybody puts their pants in the same way. And if you quit pooping, you got major problems. So,
Yes.
you know, it doesn't
Yes.
change for those people. Their head was not, the cap was not lifted off by God himself and
No.
knowledge placed in there.
No. I look. I'm because I'm not a scientist. I probably take more shots at scientists. And it's funny. I sell science books, but the further that I've gone along, the less reverence I have for
Yeah.
all of it. And here's why. I'm reading this book right now. You might be able to appreciate it. It's called Science After Babel by Dr. David Berlinski. Real high-end science guy, super smart. Written some really great books on the philosophy of science. And he said, look, he goes, scientists might be the biggest BSers in the world.
Yeah.
He said they might be because and I thought of this. Can you imagine, like, let's say you work your whole career in VBT and that's all you do. And then somebody, when you're about 60 years old, comes on and says, Bryan, you're wrong about all of it. Are you going to be like, are you going to be likely to say, oh yeah, you're right. Well, I wasted 30 years. Oh, that's too bad. No. You're going to fight.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what got Yuri in Rome. He got fired because he had such a crazy battle with Matveev. Matveev got him fired in Moscow.
I did not know that.
Yeah, a lot of people. That's how he ended up in Rome.
I just assumed he defected from.
No, him and Matveev were mortal enemies.
I did not know
mortal enemies, and he got fired. So can you imagine the greatest scientist in our field in history? You know, he's had the biggest contribution probably.
Yeah.
And he got fired.
Yeah.
So it tells you that, and a lot of these guys, like none of them, contrary to what anybody thinks, none of these guys that were in the Soviet Union were buddies.
Yeah.
So people think, oh yeah, they were just all in one big system working together. No, they weren't. I can tell you for a fact, I know all of them, and they did not like each other.
You've been in the same room with them before.
I've been at the same table with all of them.
In the same car.
In the same car, yeah, I can tell you great stories about that.
It smells like a.
I said, yeah. Doc said, I'll say it because they're both gone. It doesn't matter now. I was in the car with Isurin and Bondarchuk and Yesus. We were getting ready to go over to the hall, and guys overseas don't necessarily bathe all the time, but they use a lot of cologne. So Isurin's in the car with a ton of cologne on. Doc gets in the car and he goes, "What the hell is that?" He goes, "Smells like a French whorehouse in here." and he wasn't lying. But he didn't keep it to himself either. These guys they're like kids, like literally like kids fighting over the attention. And I've come to believe this. The scientist, his currency is recognition.
Yeah.
That's his currency.
Yeah.
So if the thing that you get by on, most scientists don't care much about money. They don't care about a lot of things, but they do care about how they're viewed by other people. And if you don't think that's a recipe for problems.
Got it, man. I had on that error measurement for the barbell, devices, it went through 8 reviews because one reviewer had a rather large ego, and I'll leave names out because it wasn't blinded, but it was like, dude, for real?
Come on.
Seriously? I remember, this is not blinded. I could see what you're saying here. This is and this is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
But that's a crazy but that's that's the way that is. It's so the takeaway message is science is important. It's very important. I sell science books. I love it. But it is not the be all to end all, and it is wrong. I mean, we found out how many different times we've been like totally wrong about a lot of things. Totally wrong.
Dude, and every time I'm wrong about something that's near and dear to me, it crushes me. I can say that. And but I guess the one thing that makes me different than not everybody, I mean, there's plenty that like learn that they're wrong and they move on, is that I was like, okay, All right. Well, that sucks. I wasn't right about that.
Oops.
And yeah, let's fix it.
Well, the nice thing is being married, though, you kind of are like used to that, you know, in a general sense. Like
Oh yeah, dude.
you don't get too immune to having any criticism or being told that you were wrong about something. So you at least stay in the groove when it
Yeah,
happens.
man. I'm telling you what, the roughest day is the day I come back from a conference because I've been told how smart I am for 3, 4, 5 days, and you stupid boy, can't you figure out what
Smack
a
you right back down
yeah
to reality.
that doesn't go on this level of dishwasher, it goes here.
You dummy. You can't even figure a dishwasher out. I can't believe they're paying you to come do
Yeah,
conferences.
yeah, she said that before. She said, "How are you a world-renowned expert, but you can't figure this out?"
You can't do the dishwasher right now. No, I
I don't
get it.
know.
Well, listen, Dr. Mann, this is great. I thoroughly enjoyed this and want to do it again because as your publisher, I suppose I should probably be getting a little bit of the word out about what you're doing. And as we went along, I wrote down different questions that I want to ask you again. So let's get back
Yeah.
together again soon and do this again because I learned quite a bit, and I'm presuming that other people did the same. And I
Well, I hope
appreciate
so.
you taking the time out today.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Thanks, Doc. I appreciate you.